How is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to hook you up with some information that you might not get anyplace else. We go through a lot of great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, cosmologies, and earth-shattering discoveries from obscure sources. Mainly, we do focus on the obscure, things that probably you wouldn't have known about otherwise. I have about 300 or so videos on ancient Egyptian tree of life, which I don't know that anybody has a whole lot of videos on that. And I have almost 600 videos on the reciprocal system of theory, by Dewey B. Larson. And I don't think anybody's really talking about that either. Those are very fundamental, and you would reward yourself by studying those. And so you can check those out on this channel. Now we're on day 244 of the unit that's called the Reciprocal Church, named in honor of Dewey B. Larson, who unified all of the sciences and then unified science with religion. So we're going to kind of take his take on religion as a foundational structure for our Reciprocal Church and add on to it with many diverse sources, form of syncretism, trying to like build our own do-it-yourself religious practice. Wouldn't really say religion, but a religious practice where you yourself can gain control of putting yourself in touch with the divine. And we try to turn you on to things that you can believe in, things that you can hang your hat on, things that you can verify for yourself, things that you can measure, things that you can certainly at least sense, and in some cases, things that even have equations attached to them. And we feel like this is absolutely necessary at this point in time because of the collapse of the Western religions. And that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at the, we're doing the deep dive on Christianity in general, the New Testament in particular. Let's say right out front, this is not anything about religion, and this is not anything about your experience of Christ in your heart or in your own experience. This is specifically about the New Testament. Okay, I'm not doubting the legitimacy of your feelings, the legitimacy of your intimacy with your relationship with the divine. I am questioning the New Testament because it's become increasingly obvious to me that the New Testament was written by the Romans, the Caesars. In first century Rome, they wrote the Gospels. It was written during the Flavian dynasty, mostly, well, half of it, well, really just the Gospels. Acts was written late in the first century. The Pauline epistles were written between 100 and 110, and some of the books of the Bible were written as late, including Revelation, were written as late as 137 to 140 AD. You know, they're all backdating the information, but of course, the New Testament is doing that, anyway, because scholars have, the consensus of scholars is that the Gospels were written in the 70s or 80s, in some cases the 90s. And so that's also way after the fact. But the fact is that there was no fact. Jesus is a fictional character created by the Romans because they were tired of the Jews being a thorn in their side. The Jews were having constant insurrections and incidents and revolutions, and they just got done fighting them in a war that lasted for 7 years. They, basically had to conquer all the Jerusalem and the temple, and then they, did Qumran and Masada and Jotapata, all these different places they had, it was part of this war. And the generals for the war were Vespasian and his son Titus. And these two folks became emperors later. And so they were both wounded in the war. So they had a bone to pick with these Jews. And so they went into their psychological warfare bag, which is definitely in character for the Romans. That was common for them. They did the same with the Jews to create rabbinical Judaism. They created a number of other religions, the cults of Augustus and Julius Caesar, the cult of Claudius, the cult of Vespasian and Titus. They were all deified by the Roman Senate, and they all have like churches and, well, not anymore, but they all did have like churches and temples and statues and shrines and all those things for their religions. The Romans were incredibly tolerant of religion. They honored everybody's religion as long as you honored their religion. And the Jews wouldn't do that. The Jews would not let them put a statue of Caesar in their temple because it goes against their strictures against graven images. They wouldn't even allow Roman coins in their temple. That's why they had all the money changers out there to change their coins that had the graven image of the Caesar on it for Jewish coins that just had like leaves and trees on them. And then the Romans were tired of their kosher food laws, their circumcision laws, their general separatism and thinking that they were the chosen people, and they were tired of their, their xenophobia, basically. And they would just not assimilate themselves to the Roman Empire the way that other peoples were doing. And so they decided to propose a Jewish leader, hero, and savior who was a prince of peace, who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, meaning paying your taxes, and who believed in turning the other cheek and really accepting your own oppression and your level or your lot in life, who believed that the Roman centurion's faith is the greatest in all of Judea, who believed that, or the Roman centurion's slave owner's faith, and also that that he would walk an extra mile with the Roman soldier's backpack on his back. So that's what they did, and they targeted toward the Jews, and they were hoping to convert as many Jews as possible into the new faith, and then eventually kind of scoot them over to get them to worship the Caesars instead of Jesus by creating a Jesus character that was set back 40 years in history, one generation for the Jews, who predicted or prophesied events that were fulfilled by Titus, the general who eventually became the emperor. So really, you start out thinking that Jesus is the hero, then you go to think, oh, well, Jesus is the Savior, the Son of God. But then you see that the prophecies that Jesus is making about his second coming are fulfilled by Titus. So Titus is the second coming of Jesus. So then you scoot over and we recognize that, oh, well, Jesus is just a prophet, and he's just kind of like the John the Baptist kind of character, and Titus is the real deal. He's the second coming. And then eventually you learn that the Jesus story is entirely fiction, and you're on what this author that we're looking at today, Michael Menescot's, what he calls pure emperor worship. So that was kind of the game, and the way that they did it is through this character named Josephus. Christians know Josephus as being really the only first century source of any kind outside of the Gospels, outside of the New Testament, that mentions Jesus in any way or corroborates the existence of Jesus. There were also a few second century authors who did so, such as Tacitus, Trajan, Suetonius, however you pronounce that, and Pliny the Younger. They were all five of those characters are all Roman royalty, including Josephus, who was an adopted son of Emperor Vespasian. And so the way they did it is that whoever Josephus was, he was also the person that wrote the Gospels. And when you read Josephus next side by side with the Gospels, you will see that there are an almost unlimited amount of parallels between the two. Kind of once you get a feel for figuring out how to pick them out. And that's what Michael Menescot did over the course of like 4 years of studying these things. And that's what he does in this book, is he shows you all of the different parallels between Wars of the Jews, that's the book by Josephus, 7 books actually, and the book of Luke. He finds 250 parallels in the book of Luke. And you could say, oh, well, Josephus is, just parodying or copying or working off of the Gospels. But there are many cases where the Gospels are actually working off Josephus as well. And so you can't really say that. They both were written at the same time by the same people for the same reason. And this was kind of a sport for the Romans. They loved word games and punning and riddles and the New Testament, and they also liked their body humor with the soft pornography, and the Bible is full of that stuff. Sometimes you have to be able to decode it, and Menescot does a pretty good job of that. But there are many other authors who have also had this thesis and have also pinned down the authorship of the Bible to Josephus. Now, Josephus, in Menescot's view, never really existed, mine too, but some people might have thought he existed. Other people think he was Arius Calpurnius Piso, who was kind of like the shadow emperor for the Romans during the times of Vespasian and Titus. So I feel like that's a secondary issue. The main issue is all of these parallels between Josephus, whoever he was, and the Gospels. And what Menescot does is he graphs them out. So he takes his graph paper. You can take your own graph paper. You can get Josephus's, the complete works of Josephus online on a PDF for free. And you read that with the Gospels. And you put the Gospels on the vertical axis, chapters 1 through 24. And you put the work of Josephus on the horizontal axis, paragraphs 1 through 694. And you graph out all 250 of the parallels, and you get a pattern. Not just random, a pattern. That is the signature that the Flavians, that is the dynasty of Romans, includes Vespasian, Titus, and Josephus, Flavius Josephus is what they called him. And the Flavians that means blonde or golden. And this is what we call the Flavian signature. They signed their names to it. The pattern that you get is 5 Latin letters, APTVS. The V could be a U as well. So Aptus or Aptvus, I think it stands for Arius Piso Titus Vespasianus. He thinks otherwise. I'm open to whatever interpretation he might have, as long as he brings the receipts, which he does, which he's going to, I believe. So we're going to go through some of these parallels right now. He does have a little bit of a paragraph here where he's going into a little bit of analysis as well. Please bear with me. This isn't ideal circumstances for me to be able to read this, so I have to really bear down to be able to see the print here. This is all from Menescott's book that just came out in the last 6 months, that is called The Origins of Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And it's chock full of information. I recommend that you buy it. But we're going through the whole thing here, and we are on page 48, I believe. But I think it is interesting that the author manages to present what seems like an interesting theological question. Okay, so we're talking about the parallels that I went through yesterday, the last parallel, which you might want to watch yesterday's video. But I'll be able to kind of guide you through this as we move. Okay, interesting theological question about 7 men marrying a woman. Okay, so that's in Luke. The question that is asked to try to stump Jesus of, if a woman marries somebody and then he dies, and then marries somebody else and he dies, and he dies, and he dies, and he dies, then when she dies, who is she married to? Okay, so about 7 men marrying a woman whilst still making it a parody of how Titus's 7 men discuss the acquisition of the harlot, Jerusalem. He mentions that Jerusalem is compared to a harlot or a prostitute, whore, in the Old Testament in a couple different locations. So that's where he's getting the idea of Jerusalem as a harlot. Only for Titus to end the conversation by favoring the living and thereby being presented as a moral individual. And that's another parallel where Titus says, I favor the living. God says that in the New Testament, or God favors the living. I guess Jesus says it, but he says that, my Father favors the living, or I can't remember the exact passage, but that the main point and the parallel is favoring the living, and thereby being presented as a moral individual. Not only can we see the likelihood that Titus' supposed conversation was manufactured, therefore that the author was writing both documents simultaneously, but it offers an example of how talented the author was. And definitely I would agree with that. These people are very talented in a very evil kind of way. But this is the Gospels are pretty much pure genius. It must have taken them forever to put this stuff together because of all these parallels. Most of the parallels are super intricate, and they're kind of incredibly well hidden. So you could read them without even seeing them until you kind of analyze the passage, and you see that there's 6 things in common between these 2 paragraphs. And they're not like random things, they're specific. Okay, like God favors the living, and 7 men discuss the acquisition of a harlot. Okay, now indeed, the story even manages to evolve the concept of 7 men going to heaven. Remember earlier that I showed that the APTVS signature is linked to the idea of God pushing the plow, known as USA, in the United States, known in the United States as Ursa Major or the Big Dipper. Okay, so the Greeks and Romans, I believe they called that, I think maybe a lot of the ancient people called the Big Dipper the plow. So the constellation in the heavens that has 7 stars. This concept of 7 stars clearly has significance to the Flavians, since a motif of 7 stars is found on the coinage of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Vespasian's the father, Titus is the son, and it's possible that Domitian is the Holy Ghost, but in real life, Vespasian was the father, who was emperor from 69 to 79 AD. Titus was the older son, who was emperor from 79 to 81. And Domitian took over, maybe killed Titus, and then became the emperor at 81 until 96 AD. It's kind of unclear whether Domitian was in on this or not, or whether he was actually opposed to it. Because he did banish Arius Piso from Rome. And so he did put back the movement by quite a while. Not until Domitian was assassinated was Piso allowed back into Rome. And again, I just emphasize that being emperor is not all it's cracked up to be, because I think like out of the first 12 emperors, like 7 of them were assassinated, and 3 of them were assassinated within like a couple months of taking the job. So, it's a hazardous job. Okay. However, whilst the senior rank of the secrecy cult would probably be told that this is his hypothesis. I explained it before, that you move from Jesus hero worship to Jesus God worship to Jesus as prophet, Titus as main God, then Jesus is fiction and Titus is the only God. And that's kind of, you get initiated into these things one at a time. That's what he calls the secrecy cult, kind of based on Mithraism. But it's also kind of just like what the Masons do, They have degrees, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th degree, or whatever. Okay, so they would probably be told that Titus was one divinely intelligent author. I think we can be confident that the Flavians outsourced the work to a team of propaganda and religion experts, perhaps only retaining general oversight of the project. And many authors are suggesting that it was Arius Piso, but also probably many members of the Herod family. And the Herod family were partly Jewish, and they escaped Jerusalem. They were the puppet kings of Judea, a whole dynasty of them. It wasn't just one. And they escaped during the war and fled to Rome. Okay, so they were at Rome at this time as well. And so they probably helped out with the cause of the writing the New Testament in terms of, situating the New Testament within the Old Testament. The New Testament is kind of like branching off from the Old Testament, but it's prophesied in many places in the Old Testament, and the Gospels cite a lot of the Old Testament, and so I'm sure that the Herods or whatever Jews were living at Rome, because there were many traitors, so to speak, or defectors to this war, because they recognized that the Jews had no chance of winning. So many Jews defected, and some of them, mainly the elite, the royalty, they were with the Romans. And that, well, we won't talk about Josephus there. That has to do with his backstory, which is probably propaganda. I'd say definitely propaganda. Okay. Next, we have a parallel involving 2 paragraphs of Jewish war. There is nothing amazing about this one. The author simply needed a series of parallels in relevant locations so that when plotted on the graph, the required message would appear. And these are some parallels that the author decided to throw in. So we got Jewish War, paragraph 626, which is book 6, chapter 4, paragraph 7. Finally, Titus entered the holy house, victorious, killing the priests. This is Jerusalem. This was during the month of Passover. And then he skips forward 6 paragraphs, and it says, a boy came from the walls of Jerusalem to drink water, but also filled a vessel with water in contravention of what the guards allowed, and fled back into Jerusalem. So with the parallels, we go to Luke, chapter 22, verses 1, and then verse 10. So verse 1 says, and Jesus entered into the temple in Jerusalem, and the Jews' Passover was at hand. So that's a very mundane parallel. Jesus and Titus both entered into the temple of Jerusalem and at Passover. Then we go to verse 10. Behold, when you are entered into Jerusalem, there a man will meet you, bearing a vessel of water. Follow him into the house he enters. Okay, so having to do with drinking water and a vessel of water. And see what he has to say. Oh, okay, we're going right to the next one. The next one was especially well hidden. Nowhere in Jewish war does it say that Titus was denied 3 times in advance of some smiting, mocking, and weeping. Instead, a careful reading of the text allows us to see that there are 3 identifiable occasions where Titus's exhortations for peace were refused. As with most of the parallels in this sequence relating to Titus and Jesus, credit is due to Joseph Atwill for identifying them. And that's from Joseph Atwill's first book called Caesar's Messiah, which is from 2005, especially the Flavian signature edition from about 2010. He also has a book called Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, which is also very relevant to this. And those are both definitely worth getting, or, reading however you want online, PDFs and stuff. Although the latter is very difficult to find on PDF. Jewish War, paragraph 635. It's book 6, chapter 6. Paragraph 2. Titus arranged an interpreter. On these occasions, Titus exhorted John to peace. John is one of the Jewish zealot leaders. exhorted John to peace, and was refused each time. So the Jews denied him 3 times. Titus says his father did not come to punish them for what they did under Cestius. Earlier in Jewish war, it says Cestius had actually sent Callus, who the Jews had attacked, thereby starting the war. And Gallus means cockerel. Okay, so when they did under Cestius, saying he came to Galilee. And they offered to come out and go to the desert, but Titus decided to kill them and instead, to kill them all instead. And he says, akin to smiting them, mocking them, and describing them repeatedly as miserable wretches. Okay, now the book of Luke, chapter 22, verse 59. In Jerusalem, they saw Peter and said, he is a Galilean. And Peter denied it. And immediately while he spoke, the cock crew. He remembered the word of the Lord and how he had said before the cockerel, or I guess that's what the cockerel is, the cock. Before the cockerel crows, you shall deny me 3 times. And he came out and wept bitterly. And the men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him. Okay, let's see his analysis. We'll go over this again tomorrow, at least briefly. The next parallel, okay, so he doesn't have an analysis there. So we can figure this out ourselves. There's this is happening at Jerusalem, but there's a reference to Galilee. There's a denial, 3 denials of Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and John denies Titus 3 times. And they both kind of figure it out before the cock crows. And then Titus decided to kill them instead, mocking them and describing them repeatedly as miserable wretches, which is the parallel to they mocked Jesus and smote him. Okay, so another kind of prosaic parallel, you know, with 250 different parallels, some of them are going to be stronger than others, but it's definitely there. So thanks for tuning in today. We'll come back tomorrow and look at this more. Have a great day.